three page layout settings, margins, page orientation, and paper size, are all used to determine how your document will look when it is printed. Margins are the blank space around the edges of a page. While most of your text and objects will appear between the margins, some items appear in the margins, for example, headers, footers, and page numbers. To set your margins, let's go to the Page Layout tab, and we're going to choose the drop-down for margins. Normal is the default setting, 1 inch all the way around the document. But we could choose, for example, narrow settings, 1/2 inch all the way around. Word repaginates our document, and when we look, we have a document that has very narrow margins. Another choice is moderate, which leaves large margins at the top and the bottom where we're likely to have headers and footers, but splits the difference 3/4 of an inch on the left and the right-hand side. This is a pretty big document, though, this employee handbook, and the odds are good that at some point we will want to put this in a binder or have it bound. So let's take a look at the kinds of margins we can use for bound documents. One choice is wide, which provides ridiculously wide margins. You might wonder why someone would use this kind of a setting, and part of the reason is that it gives you lots of space to write notes. This is the kind of margin setting that people will often choose for a document they're going to manually review and write notes on with a pen or make marks with a highlighter. But it's pretty big, 2 inches left and right. What we really want we want to have a wide margin on the side where we'll have binding. This narrow margin doesn't give us the ability to 3-hole punch this document without punching right into our text. But we don't really care as much about the margin at the outside. There are 2 different ways that we can lay out margins for binding. One is what are called mirrored margins. And with mirrored margins, we give 1 1/4 inches on the left of odd-numbered pages, the side where a 3-hole punch would be, and then a slightly narrower margin, not enough so that you really notice, but a margin that when this document is bound, there'll be approximately the same distance on either side left to be able to look at it. And then on our next page, what we have is we have that wider margin here on the right-hand side, because this is where we would expect it to be on an even page, which will be on the back side of the sheet of paper. Let's go to the Custom Margins command, which will open this Page Setup dialog box and take a look at all of our options. So here we have mirror margins, and if we change, notice that we don't have left and right margins, we have inside and outside margins. So if I need a little more room for my 3-hole punch, I can increase this, and this small preview will change. So now I have 1.5 inches on the inside, the left side of an odd page, the right side of an even page, and only 1 inch on the outside. Another possibility is simply to choose the normal margins that we already had and to say, I'd like to provide a gutter. If we choose a gutter, we'll have left and right margins, but a gutter is defined as the space that's the binding edge of a document. So this isn't like bowling where there's a gutter on either side. Here, the gutter is absolutely on the inside, left side of odd number pages. And you'll notice that it even makes it look like there's some comb binding here for the gutter. So these are all different ways that I can set my margins. If I have a set of margins that I want to use for every single document I create, I can override the current default of normal 1 inch all the way around by choosing Set as Default. Margins are the most complex of this group of page layout settings. Orientation is especially easy. There are 2 different orientations, portrait and landscape, so named for pictures in an art gallery, since most people had their portraits painted while they were standing or sitting rather than lying down. This portrait alignment is a vertical alignment where the long side of the page is in the vertical dimension. And landscape, if you imagine wonderful landscape paintings, they're more horizontal, so here's our paper turned sideways. If we choose landscape, for example, Word will repaginate our document. Now it actually has more pages in it than it did before because Word can't make quite as good use of the space that we've given it for this particular document. This isn't a bad look, but you'll notice that in areas like this, we do throw away a lot of paper that we're not using, which is part of why this is a longer document. If you were going to print this document for most people to read, you would want to leave it in the portrait orientation. We tend to save landscape for large tables or other data that really needs to be seen in more of a horizontal look. Finally, we can change the size of our page layout And this should be very easy because it's the size of whatever paper you intend to print this on. Normally, you'd use 8.5 by 11 for most of your printing, although legal, the same width but longer paper, is also used. Another North American size is tabloid paper, which is 11 by 17, two 8.5 by 11s, and you can print two up on a page and fold your paper in half to have sort of not a bound, but a single document. There are some other paper sizes here that start with the letter A that seem just a little unusual in terms of their dimensions, and that's because these are not papers that were constructed in inches. These are European paper sizes, A3, A4, A5. Again, simply choose whatever paper size you actually have in your printer. If you want to adjust the number of copies on a page, don't do it here, do it in your printer settings. While we've been changing margins, orientation, and size here on the Page Layout tab, these are print settings. So if I go backstage in Microsoft Word 2010 and choose Print, I'll have these same options here. Here are my margins, here is my paper size, and here is my orientation. And so if I make changes here, notice that they will be reflected here in my preview after Word repaginates my document. So before you print your document, when you're backstage in Word, just take a moment and check out your settings for margins, paper, and orientation to make sure that your printed document will look exactly the way that you'd like it to look.